Good afternoon, everyone. I am Susan McPherson, and I am the founder and CEO of McPherson Strategies. I'm thrilled to be here today with all of you, and I have to say I'm in complete awe of our friends at Landmark, who were able to bring this entire conference online in probably less than 3 weeks. I'm sure it was a Herculean task, but the upside is they had 5,000 or more register. So it was a way to make the conference much more inclusive. So our next session is going to look specifically at how 2 organizations made the decision to put focus and resources on or towards mental well-being of their employees and mental wellness of their employees, communities, customers, and their audiences. In doing so, they both made the decision to partner with the company Headspace. Given the global pandemic and the most recent continued outbreak of bigotry and violence that is taking place, we know the time is now to seriously consider how we all are faring physically and mentally. So it seems like an opportune time to discuss this very important topic. So to begin with, I first want to introduce my stellar panel. With me today, we have Matt Kress, who is the Senior Manager of Military and Veterans Affairs for Starbucks, coming to us from beautiful Seattle. We have Sherrie Westin, who is the President of Social Impact and Philanthropy at Sesame Workshop. And I'm sure there's not a soul in the room who doesn't know Sesame or Starbucks. And last but not least, we have Rich Pierson, who is the co-founder and CEO of Headspace. So before we dive into questions, I'd love each of them to give you all a little bit of background about who they are and perhaps a bit about their role at their particular organizations. So why don't we start with you, Sherrie, if that's okay with you?
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And, I'd be happy to. I am Sherrie Westin. I'm President of Social Impact and Philanthropy, as Susan said, at Sesame Workshop, a bit of a mouthful. But I do think, not everyone knows Sesame Street and loves it, but often thinks of it as a U.S. television show. And they may not realize that Sesame Workshop is the nonprofit organization that produces Sesame Street here and around the world. And I think another thing that people often don't realize is that we are not just the local US version, we are in 150 countries. And in many of those countries, we create completely local productions that are designed to meet the needs of children in their country, reflecting their own language, culture, even with their own Muppets. So it's the Sesame model, but it's indigenous, if you will. And I think that's often where we're able to have the greatest impact, because it's in many places reaching children who have no other means of early education. The other thing that we do, and I have the privilege of overseeing, is our social impact work is designed to reach children in the most vulnerable places, reach children and help them tackle some of the most challenging issues. And we've had a long history of doing just that here in the US and around the world. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk about what we're doing today, because I think that fits right in with helping children overcome challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sherrie. And just for everybody's knowledge, Sesame has been around for 50 years.
50 years, yes. 50 years is last year.
And when I think of things that America exports, it's one of the few that I'm extraordinarily proud of, in addition to Starbucks. So we'll go to Matt, if you want to tell us a bit about your role.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I lead our Veterans and Military Affairs work, which sits under Starbucks Global Social Impact team. And where I focus is on our partnerships and relationships that support active duty military veterans and military families, as well as the veterans and military spouses that we have inside Starbucks.
Amazing. And you were in the military before, so.
Yes, I have a career service. I spent 22 years in the Marine Corps between active duty and reserve time. And I also spent 10 years as a firefighter EMT before I joined Starbucks.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service. Matt. That's very, very impressive. And now we will go to Los Angeles, where Rich can tell us a bit about his role at Headspace.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for having me and putting this event.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Headspace. And beyond the kind of the day-to-day responsibilities of that role, the piece that I'm kind of most focused on at the moment is how our product and platform extends into other areas beyond just meditation. So, you know, we've released a sleep vertical, some of the work that we've done with Sesame Street, and thinking about how, you know, meditation and mindfulness can start to interact with children's lives, as well as looking at movement and other ways that you can apply mindfulness to your everyday life, and thinking about this idea of a mindful living platform. So that's where I spend most of my time. And
can you give everyone a sense, how large is Headspace? How many downloads? You know, what's...
We're in 190 countries. So we've got members in 190 countries. We have over 67 million people that have downloaded the product. And we work with 700 enterprise partners, where we partner with them to look after the health and happiness of their employees. And we're also, you know, the end of this year, beginning of next year, we'll be releasing our first kind of clinical strength product into healthcare, where we believe that meditation can have an outsized impact against chronic diseases.
Amazing. And you founded it. So
yeah,
clearly, that's quite impressive. And I have to say, clearly the three of you are putting very ubiquitous around the world, which is positive in my book. So for the audience, and it's very strange to be talking to an audience that we can't see, but we do want to make it interactive. But I do encourage you, if you have questions, you do need to use the Q&A button. And we're going to have a chat amongst the panelists, and then, you know, certainly we will take questions. But feel free to start adding your questions as you have them, because if you're anything like me, in 20 minutes you will forget the question that you had if you don't write it down. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in and start with a question for both Matt and Sherrie. Each of your organizations chose to partner with Headspace. So it would be great just to dive in and find out, you know, why you chose Headspace and what's involved in each of your partnerships.
Matt, you want to start, or do you want?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to start. In January of this year, we began a partnership with Headspace to offer a free subscription to all 300,000 of our US and Canadian partners, as we refer to our employees, as part of our commitment to break the stigma around mental health treatment and support their mental health and well-being. Since that point, more than 68,000 of our partners have downloaded the app since we made it available. And Headspace is part of a comprehensive set of mental health benefits that I'll talk about in greater detail in a minute.
Okay, and I'm happy to pick up there. You know, I mentioned that we do a lot of work to help children overcome traumatic events. And so obviously, given the pandemic, Sesame immediately started creating content to help children with this challenging time. And it's a larger initiative called Caring for Each Other. But one of my favorite parts is that we immediately reached out to Headspace to do a partnership. It's called Sesame Street Monster Meditations. And if you have to go on YouTube, because if you go on YouTube, you'll see 6 adorable animated meditations. And we've done this, you know, this is not the first time we've taught children mindfulness. It's a lot of what's incorporated. We have Elmo teaching belly breathing, and in all of our content to help children, whether it's parental addiction, foster care, homelessness, there's so many issues that cause, you know,
anxiety.
It's and toxic stress in a child. And so this is not new to us, but partnering with Headspace is. And I have to say, I love these meditations. They're meant for parent and child to engage, which is also so important. I mean, that's so important for a child regardless, but when children are going through traumatic times, that engagement with a caring adult is even more important. And then I just have to say that for all of those Headspace fans, it's wonderful to see Elmo or Grover doing these meditations. But what's even more fun, you'll recognize Andy's voice, but then when you see the animated Andy, it's pretty cute.
I love that.
Don't you agree, Rich? You have to agree. That's
Yeah, I've got to say it's one of my. We've had many highlights at Headspace, but I can say this for Andy as well, that the Sesame partnership, to see it come out like that for us was a real one of our big highlights. It's incredible.
They are adorable, and they're important, and I think they're meaningful. So it's a wonderful partnership.
Yeah.
And
there are like 10 million views on them as well. So
yeah, I was going to ask you what's been the penetration. Okay. And Matt, at Starbucks, what has been the response?
Yeah, the response has been fantastic. 96% of the people that work for Starbucks, especially in the US and Canada, sit in our field, in our retail environment. So they have a really different reality as far as time available. And some of the shorter tools that are available on Headspace or the on-demand tools are a perfect solution for them.
Excellent, excellent. So Sherrie, I was lucky enough to interview Sherrie on an impact chat last week, so I got to learn more about Sesame Workshop's response to COVID. And, as we know, it's upended millions and millions of lives. And certainly my heart goes out to people who have lost loved ones as well as lost jobs. And it's obviously causing countless challenges for our society. Can you talk to us about your particular response and why you chose to place a focus on mental well-being and wellness and self-care?
Absolutely. Well, you have to also understand that, we've mentioned Sesame Street's been around for 50 years. It'll be 51 this year, but our curriculum has always been what's called a whole child curriculum. So our mission is to help children grow smarter, stronger, and kinder. And it sounds like a clever tagline, but it's absolutely true. It's baked into everything we do. So for a child to thrive, it's not just the cognitive, the smarter, the academics. It's stronger in terms of resilience and health, and kinder in terms of empathy. And so those social emotional skills have always been a critical part. And to help children manage stress, again, we have so much science today that shows the devastating impact that traumatic experiences or prolonged exposure to trauma and stress can have on a child's healthy brain development. So we created immediately, and again, this is not foreign to us. We do this for so many issues, looking at challenging issues through the lens of a child. So given COVID, we immediately sort of pivoted and started creating content that would be specifically around the tools and resources that families need, that caregivers and parents need to help their children with this pandemic, with coping with such a challenging time. And listen, I have to say, it speaks to me, to the incredible power of Sesame Street. I mean, think about it. We were created to reach children with quality early education, even when they didn't have access. And so today, with millions of children around the world without access, we're able to reach them through educational media. And caring for each other really has 5 areas. It's to provide comfort, to give resources and tools and messaging that provides comfort for children. It's to manage anxiety, an example being our partnership with Headspace and those techniques and recommendations to help children manage anxiety. It's to create routines, which are so important for children. They thrive in a sense of structure, and so much of that is lost right now. It's to foster playful learning at home, which is so important. And then lastly, it's to help them stay physically and mentally healthy. So those are the components of our initiative. And that initiative it's free bilingual resources. And it's not just here in the US, it's around the world. We're working in the Syrian response region with our humanitarian work with the IRC, creating similar content. We're doing family specials, all over the world, thanks to funding from Lego. And I think that, again, it speaks to the power of Sesame Street, the opportunity for us to still provide these resources, and it's it's something that will keep going because there's a new normal, and the need for this is not going to go away anytime soon.
Sherrie, I was just sitting here listening to you and thinking, I wish there was a Sesame for adults.
Well, there is. So much of this is for adults. Listen, don't tell Andy, but often use the Sesame little YouTube meditation instead of my normal app, okay? But no, I think one of the powerful things about Sesame Street, and one of the reasons we're most effective in helping vulnerable children, is because Sesame appeals to adults. And that's no accident. That even 50 years ago was intended if we included celebrities and musicians and humor and parodies, the adult would watch with the child. And again, that today, with all the science behind it, means that what we create is not just the tool for the child, but the catalyst for that all-important engagement between the adult and child. And that's what a child needs most.
That's true. Well, maybe because I don't have children, I haven't been paying as much attention, but I think I will.
You should, yes.
I just had I don't want to say a brain, you know what, but you know, one of those. And I had memories of when Rita Moreno was on Sesame. It was a classic. I mean, that just spawned in my head. And, you know, Matt, I'd love you to also just talk a little bit about how it was rolled out at Starbucks and you know, why you chose also, you know, mental wellness to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. In our culture, many changes start with our partners. And we heard very clearly that the mental health benefits that we previously had were not comprehensive, responsive, or culturally relevant. Based on this input, our partner resource group designed a very comprehensive benefits package from the ground up. They started over listening to our partners, looking at some of the best practices and other corporate responses to come up with a totally new benefit. And a few of the elements of that are the access to Headspace that I talked about, a new mental health care benefit provided by Lyra Health for all U.S. partners and eligible family members. That includes access to 20 sessions a year with a mental health therapist or coach at no cost. And this summer, we're launching dedicated training for all US and Canadian store managers in partnership with the National Council for Behavioral Health, inspired by mental health first aid. And this training will provide guidance and skills needed for store managers to provide initial resources that can support partners who may be experiencing, say, a mental health issue, substance use problems, or a crisis in the moment.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Rich for a second. I'd be curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the mental health challenges you're seeing, specifically in the last few months, perhaps, what you're anticipating coming, you know, in the next few months. And where you feel the, you know, various apps that Headspace provides could be valuable.
Yeah, I think so. I think we've always, because of our vision of improving health and happiness in the world, and thinking through that vision through our, you know, through the lens of the mind, I think we've always felt that there's a huge mental health kind of crisis. We always felt that it was coming. I think this, firstly, the pandemic, and now what we're experiencing in America on our, you know, on our streets and on our televisions, I think has accelerated that issue dramatically. And so the way that we think about it is that it's made the mental health crisis kind of accelerate by a couple of years. Maybe we thought this would happen 3 years out, because if you look at the rate of increase in mental health conditions, you cannot train enough human beings to be able to actually solve those problems. So we're going to have to think of smart digital platforms, content way, you know, scalable solutions that we can start to solve some of these problems. So I think we've just seen a huge increase. I can talk also about what we've seen internally with our team is that everyone has a slightly different situation. They're dealing with very different experiences. And so to come up with a more personalized route for folks, and I think that's some of the work that Matt was talking about. There has to be lots of different ways for folks to be able to solve the problem that's unique to them. And we've seen enterprises reaching out to us for help has increased kind of 500% since this pandemic started. And we've seen up to 1,000% increases on our stress content, our anxiety content. So they seem to be the big buckets. It's people are a lot more stressed and they're a lot more anxious, which is, you know, they're not, I don't think that's massively surprising, but we've just seen the demand across all of our platform and our business just increase dramatically over the last few months, unfortunately.
But that's, at least they're taking action, right? I mean, you know, I would almost be more disturbed if you didn't see that. You know, forgive me for not asking. I mean, you came up with this idea. Can you talk just a little bit about how you created Headspace? I think that
Well,
just that is interesting.
yeah, I mean, there's thousands of people that have created Headspace, and all of our members that genuinely,
Give
like,
yourself some credit.
no, genuinely. But I think that Andy and I, when we first met, it was born out of his experience of being, a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and having really struggled with his own mind when he was in his teenage years, having lost, quite a few people close to him, and went off on a journey to become a monk for 10 years. And my own personal experience was of having a mental breakdown via kind of anxiety, is the best way that I can describe it. And I didn't really know what to do with those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions. And I tried everything. And I did feel very desperate. I think I did have the gift of desperation looking back on it. And Andy taught me meditation. And I genuinely, I've said this before, but I genuinely feel like he saved my life at that point, and took it down a different path than the one that I was on. And I think we became very passionate about how do we get this out to more people. And we actually started off as a non-profit. We used to match subscriptions 1-for-1, but then we couldn't really scale that. So, and that's why we started to focus on education as our social impact. But it's always been at the core of everything that we've done, is like, how do we get people to think about their mind as their most precious resource? It's the thing that we experience everything through, our good, bad, and different, but we spend very little time looking after it. And so that's really the kind of crux of the Headspace vision and product, and why we started it.
Well, thank you for that background. It's quite illuminating. Matt, I'm going to turn to you now. For whatever reason, in this country, I have less information to be able to state this globally, but there's been stigma around addressing mental health issues. And I'd be curious, how, in your view, can the business community do a better job of addressing this and perhaps lessening that stigmatism that exists?
Yeah, I think one of the huge realizations with Starbucks, because our partner base skews younger, is that they don't have the same stigma around mental health and talking about their personal mental health journey or seeking treatment. And we've been playing old narratives and old tapes. And once we started talking to our partners, we understood that they are absolutely willing to talk about this in a very public way, and we're very hungry for new resources. So I think it starts with talking to your employees and understanding where they are, what their needs are, and what they would like to see in a program. Because they're the ultimate recipients, and when they benefit from this, they're going to be happier, healthier, more engaged employees.
Yeah. And I know, Sherrie, you look at it through this lens of, from the childhood up, and creating just, a wellness approach, like, and balance. Any thoughts on also just how, on a global perspective, how to?
Well, on how important it is, absolutely. And I mean, when you mention stigma, I do think one of the other things Sesame has done so well is help to normalize, situations so children don't feel alone, whether it's creating a Muppet Carly who's in foster care, and the story extends to her mother is struggling with parental addiction. And those may sound dark. They're not. In a Sesame world, it's about giving tools and hope and helping a child feel less alone. But I think it's a great opportunity to increase awareness and empathy around so many challenging issues like this. And I have to say, even though we're talking specifically about COVID, Rich, when you talk about the huge increase in the need to address and deal with stress, I can't even imagine how much greater that is today, given the racial injustice and what our country is going through in terms of civil unrest. I mean, and it breaks your heart. And I have a feeling for some people, this is the equivalent of COVID-19, that they're under so much stress and pain. And, I think it just makes us want to redouble our efforts to help people feel less alone, to feel that we're there, we're caring for one another. And again, I think it speaks to Sesame. You know, we do so much to promote inclusion and acceptance and understanding. The first multiracial show ever on television, right? And we're a street where everyone comes together, and regardless of their color or their fur or their, so I think that's going to be an even greater need today to help people through this.
I wish we could bring Mr. Rogers back, you know, and all the ethos he taught. And, you know, I mean, yes, I mean, you know, prior to the whole COVID, I've been studying a lot and researching a lot around what social media is doing to our teens. And, you know, if you look at the statistics coming out of the crisis text line, you know, founded by an amazing visionary, Nancy Lublin.
Right.
The numbers, you know, are just, prior to all of this, were skyrocketing because of just the pressure. And, you know, I would love if you could, Rich, maybe talk about, you know, when people, I don't know if you do any studies on what drives somebody to buy or download Headspace. You know, do you find it skewing a certain age? I mean, are there any kind of averages you can share with us?
I was on mute. Zoom moment for all of us. We've got a very broad member base that, you know, ranges from, you know, 18 to 90 years old. I think actually our oldest member is about 92. But the bulk of it is definitely in the 25 to 45 year old kind of range, and pretty much 50-50 gender split. We're, as I said, in 190 countries, but 40% of our member base is in the US. So, and then the next biggest market after that is the UK. And then it kind of goes, you know, it goes from there. So but the main reason that people come to us, even before this, you know, the pandemic, is stress and anxiety. They're the two. And my sense with that, you know, for what it's worth, and some of the research that we've done, is that actually stress is a big bucket for many things. You know, what is it that's actually causing you stress? There could be many underlying factors that are causing it, and same with anxiety. But they feel, you know, if someone can't label their emotions or what's going on for them, that feels like an easy start point for people to identify with. But they're the two main kind of entry points that folks have. We've done a lot of clinical work around the effects of Headspace against specific symptoms.
So if a company or a nonprofit wanted to partner with you, can you speak to that? Is there a process? Is there?
Yeah, so there is.
The phone and call you.
Well, they don't call me. They call far more skilled people than me. But they speak to the Headspace for Work team. And then, depending on the size of the organization, we'll then tailor a specific program based on the needs to what, you know, how Matt described it. Every culture is different. Every communication opportunity is different within an organization. And Matt probably tell you, you know, we work really hard with the PR team and the comms team at Starbucks to make sure that we could get the messaging out in the right way. And they have a very unique population where most of their folks, as Matt said, are on the shop floor in Starbucks all around the world. And that would be different to someone that's got most of their folks in an HQ. So and then we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we actually communicate this to those populations in a way that they're going to understand. Because, you know, some of the questions are, you know, why meditation, why mindfulness? People will reject it or they're not open to it. And so you need to really be thoughtful how you position the whole product depending on the culture.
Sure. So Matt, was it difficult to get the word out?
No, not at all. I mean, we've got a number of tools to reach our partners, and then just the awareness of Headspace was so strong that our partners were very excited and asking, you know, how soon is this going to start, because they became aware of it, and they've jumped on it.
And do you have any data as to which countries, you know, I mean, take the US out, which countries seem to have the most penetration in terms of?
Well, right now, this is only available to our US and Canadian partners.
Okay. Is there plans to expand?
We're certainly talking about it.
Nobody, no, shh, you don't have to tell. You could break some news here. I'm just kidding. Well, you know, I'm going to remind the audience because we have yet to get any questions, and it makes me wonder, is anybody watching? But I just want to remind everyone and anyone in the audience, if you have a question, just simply type it in where there is Q&A, and hopefully, you know, we can answer it.
Susan, I see like 8 Q&A already in the queue. Can you not see them?
They're not coming up for me.
They're right at the bottom where it says Q&A. I see now they're 9.
Okay, I had to click a different button. All right, this is a bit of the rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time. So somebody said, oh, there's somebody very nice saying she's up very early, so she must, oh, she's coming in from Australia. She wants to get she'd love to work with you all and wondering who's hiring. But from Lauren Coleman, we have a note that says, beyond Sesame, what types of education-related partnerships do you expect to engage in to support kids, given the moment we are in with the pandemic and state of violence in the world? Do you want to take that, Sherrie?
I think it's to Headspace. Beyond Sesame, what types of education-related partnerships do you have? Yeah, I don't think that's for me.
Or it could be Matt. But Rich, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so let me just understand. Because I'm trying to follow the questions myself. So it's the question is, are we going to be doing any more partnerships beyond Sesame?
Education-related partnerships to support kids. Yes.
I think as this is unfolded, you know, we sent out a note to the team today to say that, you know, we need to think about more diverse content in the product. And, you know, as I said up top, you know, my main focus is thinking about how does Headspace expand beyond just meditation. Mm-hmm. So eyes open exercises, movement, fit, you know, and sleep. I think that we do want to do some specific content that covers this particular moment. But we want to make sure that we do it thoughtfully and with the right partners, but the team are actively working on it at the moment. It's just I don't have anything to announce as we sit here today.
Sure. And then we have John, who's the founder of Life Aid, a suicide prevention program for military veterans, first responders, and their families to improve health and resilience by peer support, technology, functional medicine. His org recently launched the Voice Project, Veterans Out, Improving Communities Everywhere. Since the volume of calls to Veteran Suicide Prevention Lifeline has seen a dramatic increase, even in the last few days due to the riots, what plans or investments does Starbucks or Headspace have or are thinking about? Matt?
Rich, do you want to go first? I'm going to start out with this.
Okay, I'm happy to. Well, there's a few things. There were several charities that we supported as a company, 2 local, 1 national, that were all focused around social justice and thinking about the long-term impact and how we could put our dollars to the best possible use in our local community and obviously across America. So that was one thing we did. And then the second thing is the thing I mentioned previously, which is thinking about what is the content that we can create that can meet this moment and help folks as they're going through a very particular moment in the world. And so that's an ongoing commitment that we want to make. Understanding that anxiety, you know, it would have been one thing to have had this, but on top of COVID and everything else that's happening in the world at the same time, I do think this takes a different lens to try and help our members look after the state of their mind. So we're thinking about it pretty deeply.
Sure.
And I'm happy if you want to, Susan. I could talk about this all day because it's some of the key parts of our work to support the military community. And as we're listening to what their needs are and how we can best advocate and support for the military community, mental health and wellness has really come to the forefront. And we have a number of great partnerships that have evolved alongside us. You know, Hiring in transition out of the military, especially at the height of the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, were the main focus. But as those have wound down, mental health and wellness has really come to the forefront, and some great organizations that we partner with, like Team Red, White, and Blue, Blue Star Families, Team Rubicon, have come along with us in focusing in those areas. And then we have newer partnerships with a few organizations like Headstrong, which provides no cost rapid treatment to combat veterans and their families. We are funding the Resilience Center out of Columbia University, which trains VA clinicians in the realities of treating combat veterans and their families. We have a number of programs with Hiring Our Heroes under the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation that looks at the mental health and wellness needs of military spouses. So we're deeply engaged in this space and continuing to evolve our approach there. Coincidentally, we just wrapped up a promotion in our stores where the proceeds of the sales of one of our military cards went to Team Red, White, and Blue and to Headstrong for their continued work, or excuse me, with Blue Star Families and Headstrong.
Thank you. I was asked what the dog's name is. If you can see, there's a dog that is part of our conversation today, but she's very sleepy right now, but that is Phoebe. And Phoebe loves Sesame Street, I will say.
So I was just going to, sorry, I didn't mention I forgot to mention the organizations, which I think that, you know, in case anyone wants it, they're awesome, which is the Community Coalition in South LA, the Liberty Hill Foundation, and Black Lives Matter. So they're the three that we supported. So
thank you for that, Rich. And you got me off the dog topic, which is good. This may be a question for all of you, but from the panel's perspective, what would be the biggest change maker in the field of child mental health right now?
Well, I'm happy to take it. I think, you know, we've talked a little bit about reduction of stigma, and I think that's so important. I also think it would be about just the more awareness there is on the effect of stress and mental health on a child's brain development, with long-term consequences on their ability to thrive. So I think that reaching young children with quality early education and educating those parents and caregivers as to the importance of a whole child and their mental health would go a long way to having people invest in that early on.
Excellent. Sherrie, this is also a question for you. As a nonprofit organization, how does Sesame fund this work?
Well, that's, you know, for every nonprofit, that is always the biggest challenge. I think for Sesame Street, Sesame Workshop is also challenging because people don't often know we're a nonprofit. You know, we do have the ability to license the characters to bring in unrestricted funds. And of course, all of that is really hurting right now, like live shows and those opportunities where we license. But everything we do is nonprofit. We're a 501c3, so it has to be on the support of foundations, funders, and we're struggling a bit with that, but so many nonprofits are. We have created the Critical Needs Response Fund specifically to fund this kind of work, our COVID response, because it's not just here, it's in Bangladesh, it's in, you know, the Syrian response region, it's all over the world. And we rely on the generosity of supporters and funders. And if anybody is willing, they can go to sesameworkshop.org and they'll see the opportunity to support our work.
And no dollar is too small.
No.
Please, make a plea. And you know, we seem to have a lot of folks coming from the nonprofit sector today, which is great. But here's a question I'd love to hear more about: Headspace for nonprofits. I work with the legal aid community in California, 1,000 attorneys serving low-income people's needs as they deal with the challenging issues that we know, for instance, right now are becoming enormous, such as eviction, domestic violence, asylum, and they could truly benefit from the product. First of all, thank you for that question, and thank you for the work you do. Rich, can you perhaps give some info back?
Yeah, so as I said, when we used to match subscriptions, I think at one point we were working with over 1,000 nonprofits, and that was pretty difficult to scale as the business got bigger. And so I think the intention was great, but the actual delivery of it was difficult. And so we pivoted to make it free for all teachers, K through 12, and really focus on education, thinking that if we could provide it for teachers who are doing the most important work, we believe that they could help to, pass that on to the kids that they were teaching, and maybe that would start to, to fit into the way that they taught their classrooms. So that's where we were really laser focused. When COVID hit, we made it free for all healthcare professionals. So we partnered with the Ministry of Health in France, the NHS in the UK, and if you've got an MPI number in the US or a registered nurse ID, you can get free access for a year. And then recently we just made it free for anyone that's unemployed. So if you enter in when you had your last job, who you worked for, and you go through a simple flow, you can get access to Headspace for a year. So we're trying to reach as many folks as we can in a kind of thoughtful way. The sad truth is, I'd love to make it free for everyone is the honest answer. But it's, how to grow a business, attract the best talent and walk that line. We have to work out where we focus our resources. And that's where we've decided we think we can have the most impact. And it doesn't mean that the folks that you're talking about don't need access to it. But if they get into those groups, they can definitely have it for free.
Well, this would dovetail this question from Sanjay Rao. Curious to hear your take on how we can encourage more funders for mental wellness solutions, especially for those that are created by or for persons of color.
Who's that for?
That's for all of us, all of you.
Matt, Sherrie, you got any thoughts on that?
Listen, again, I think the more information is out there on the benefits of healthy mindfulness, I think the more people will understand why it's worthy of investing in.
Yep. I mean, our brain controls everything. So, I think sometimes we forget that. Matt, did you have thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, I would say also understanding that mental wellness and mental health challenges touch every aspect of our society. It's, if you mention mental health challenges, people often think about combat veterans, but the case is it's applicable to all segments of our society, and the benefits of mental wellness are equally applicable. So when people think about the positive impact it can have on every segment of our society, that should motivate that engagement and that giving.
Yeah, I think the other piece of that question was around funding
Yes.
founders of people of color, and I think that's more work that we need to do as a collective. There isn't enough funding, and across every sector is the truth. So yeah, I would love to see more funding for all mental health solutions, but especially for founders who are people of color as well. I think that is a huge shortfall in the space.
Yeah, and not just in this space, but in every space.
Exactly.
That also leads me, this question is very interesting. The person writes, I love stories. And obviously we learn through stories. That's how we learn from, as soon as we're crawling. But do each of you have stories of transformation of children who, using meditation, using the Elmo app, how have their behaviors changed? So I guess, Sherrie, if you want to take that, and Matt, if you can speak probably anonymously about, employees who have benefited from this program.
Well, specifically from this program, which is fairly recent, but I do know both anecdotally and from feedback we've gotten from parents. I'll give one example. Is one of the free monster meditations is on bedtime, Elmo's bedtime routine, and I have had more parents of children of a certain age say that now is their go-to and it's a wonderful little, I just love this meditation, but it's like Elmo's starts with his toes and works his way up, and now that becomes their bedtime routine. And if Elmo's doing that to go to bed, it can be very powerful influence on a young child.
I'm sure. Matt?
Yeah, we have a internal social network. There's a mental health matters group on, and there's so many fantastic stories in there about our partners who have used the different resources, not only for themselves, but for their families, and how that's benefited everybody in their family, and also to see them support each other in such a meaningful way.
That's great. Jane Kwan writes, in general, what do you think corporations can do to address, promote, and create a safe space for mental health and wellness for their employees, who, of course, are mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, uncles, aunts, friends, beyond the traditional affirming the EAP program through insurance and referencing published materials? Well, clearly what Starbucks is doing is beyond the EAP program, and but I'd be curious, just, Rich, if you have thoughts here, overall, obviously funding organizations, but, if anything, what else can companies be doing for their employees specifically?
Well, I think the biggest success stories that we've seen is when the CEO of the company actively gets behind the program. Yeah. And so if you take Starbucks example, Kevin has been a champion for this, and you feel it when you meet their team. It runs all the way through. And I think unless you have very senior buy-in, I don't think it scales in the way that, and I'm sure Matt's probably got experience of this, seen, maybe when it has worked and hasn't worked, but I think that is a really important piece of it. And then I think it's having the forums and the permission for people to be able to practice whatever kind of platforms or products or services you're putting in place. And so, for us, every day, twice a day, we have a meeting block where people can meditate or take time for themselves, and people can't book meetings over that time slot, 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock. There's a very definitive way that you can start to help folks have permission to do something as simple as taking some time out. And it's not to meditate, they can use it however they want. So I think there's so many ways, but for me, it has to come from leadership. That's where I've seen the biggest impact.
Well, and if I can add, I try to find silver linings. And if I think about this pandemic, I think it's all made vulnerability much more acceptable. So if anything, we've seen CEOs and we've seen leadership step up and talk about, wow, I'm afraid, or this is scary. And 3 years ago, you would rarely see that happen. So this hopefully, and then of course, because of the racial violence and just the egregious, I can't even begin because we'll go down a whole nother path, but a lot of people feel unsteady and unsure, and people are looking for guidance. So I think this is an opportunity for CEOs to step up and take account that, this is all part of how we can continue to grow as a society and dealing with any kind of mental fears and challenges we're facing. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah, similar to what Rich was talking about, our entry point into this was normalizing the conversation. Making sure that people had permission to talk about it, and it became part of our culture. If you needed to take a sick day for whatever reason, that's normal, that's okay. But talking about taking a mental health or a mental wellness day is something that needs to become normal. And from Kevin Johnson, our CEO, all the way down to our employees, we've encouraged those conversations. And I'll just, anecdotally, one thing I've noticed from our mid-level leaders, when they're talking to their teams, they're emphasizing, hey, this is a tough time. There's so many things happening. We're really busy as a company. Our society's having challenges. Please make sure that you're taking care of yourself and you're taking a little bit of time away. And I'll say a year or 2, 3 years ago, I did not hear that emphasis. So I'm seeing a dynamic shift in Starbucks, and then some of the other companies that I'm working with are engaged in this space. Seeing the changes in their companies has been very evident of what's happening across our country and how this is becoming normalized, which is the entry point.
Thank you. That's so helpful. Sherrie?
I could add one thing. I mean, it's not about our employees per se, but when you know, for this content that we create to help children through traumatic experiences. And as I mentioned, it's for parents and caregivers as well. And whether it's in the refugee camps in, you know, Lebanon or Jordan or Iraq, or whether it's with our partners locally in the US, we partner through local service organizations. It's called Sesame Street and Communities, so that we're arming them with this content and these resources, and then they're serving the most vulnerable children. But always now we focus also on taking care of the caregiver, that it's not just about how to care for your child, but if you're not experiencing self-care and practicing self-care too, you know, it's like put your oxygen mask on before you put it on your child. And so that's now a huge part of everything we're providing, is to make sure we're not ignoring that parent or caregiver has to be taken care of as well in order to really help children.
Yeah. You know, we only have about 3 minutes left, so we'll take one question, and then I just want to give each panelist a moment to, you know, add any final thoughts. And perhaps we can go through personally the panelists to answer some of these questions in the written way, in the written mode. But somebody specifically asked Rich, and I think this is very opportune. What has been a mantra or a narrative you've found specifically helpful in this last week or the last few days specifically?
I mean, yeah, I was going to say, actually, on the back of I also just want to put my hands up and say, as a CEO and founder of Headspace, I don't think I've done as much as I could have done. Well, I definitely haven't. And I've definitely have fallen short in a lot of areas. And I think this moment has shown those shortcomings. And so I don't want anyone to think that we have this all worked out at Headspace. Like, I think it's really important. Like, these are things I've seen work, but I think we've got a long way to go in making sure that our house is completely in order ourselves. So that would be the first thing I'd say. The thing that I always try and live my life by is this idea of, it's a Tibetan Buddhist kind of idea, which is only the impossible is worth doing. And I think I love that sentiment, and I kind of feel like sometimes it can feel like it's impossible that we can fix these things. But I am an optimist. I do believe that we can make meaningful change against a lot of these areas. I think it's going to take time. I don't think the answers are straightforward, but I really believe that we can. And so that, for me, is something that has helped these last few months.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Quite a bit of a reckoning going on, and I think it needs to happen. I'm being told we have about 1 minute left, so I think maybe we can say goodbye to the audience, and I can formally thank Sherrie Westin from Sesame Workshop. And don't forget, if you want to support Sesame, you can do so at their website. Matt Kress from Starbucks, and I'm sure Matt would appreciate any of us buying a Starbucks napkin.
I'll get a latte to cheer you after this, okay?
And Rich Pierson, thank you so much. And personally, I learned a lot, and I really, really, really appreciate the good and important work you all are doing. And last but not least, thank you to Mel and Zeve and the team at Landmark. It was a delight to work with you all. So, mwah.
Thank you all.
Great.
Thank you, Susan.